guys, so I thought today I would do a video all about underhyped books. So I recently did a video all about overhyped books that were, in my opinion, overhyped and didn't live up to my expectations. However, I thought it might be nice to do the flip side of that and tell you some books that I think are underhyped, books that I really enjoyed but unfortunately don't seem to have received the attention that they deserve. Now, the way I've judged this is by going onto Goodreads and finding books that have less than 500 ratings on Goodreads. So less than 500 people have given these a star rating on Goodreads. I'm sure more than 5 people have actually read them. Not everybody uses Goodreads, but I think a lot of us use Goodreads. So I feel like it's probably a reflection of how often you might have heard this book be talked about in comparison to some of the books that are just constantly flung in your face. Now, you've probably heard me talk about some of these books before because I did enjoy them, but hopefully it will pique your interest in a few books that deserve your attention. So without further ado, let's get into the books. I'm going to start with a collection of poetry. It's not as difficult to find poetry that has less than 500 ratings on Goodreads as some other genres because it's not necessarily as popular, but this is a book that I just feel like so many of you would enjoy and I absolutely adored. It was a 5 out of 5 star poetry collection for me, and that is You Sad Feminist by Megan Beach. This is the poet's second collection of poetry, and I equally adored her first collection, which is When I Grow Up I Want to Be Mary Beard, but I wanted to mention You Sad Feminist because I think I've talked about it less on this channel and it's even less hyped. And this collection, you might be able to tell from the title, deals both with activism, being a feminist, being a woman in contemporary society, trying to bring about change, trying to do what you can do, but at the same time struggling with things like depression and low moods and being overwhelmed. And as somebody who is a feminist, who tries to be an activist and also has struggled with depression on and off, this book resonated with me so much. But it wasn't a depressing collection. Instead, I felt like I had a companion when I was reading this collection. I felt like I wasn't alone. I felt reassured. I felt empowered. And it was just like sitting with a friend who understood what you were going through, but you could just sort of pat each other on the back and say, we're in this together, let's keep going. And it was an amazing experience. And not only that, but they are wonderful poems. I think even if you're somebody that hasn't yet found yourself getting into poetry and are looking for places to get into poetry, this is a great one to start, because I don't think Megan Beach's poetry is that kind of poetry where it intentionally tries to hide the meaning from you, and to understand it you have to sit and write an essay on it. It's clear, it's upfront, but at the same time visceral and powerful, and it's got a beautiful rhyming pattern, a beautiful structure and a beautiful beat to it, and it's lovely to read out loud. So I would highly recommend You Sad Feminist. Next up, I'm going to mention a collection of short stories, and this is New World Fairy Tales by Cassandra Parkin. This is a collection of, I believe it was 6 fairy tale retellings, most of which seem to be set in a sort of 20th or 21st century setting. And not a lot of them contain a lot of magic. There are elements of magical realism in this collection, but some are far more explicit than others, and some appear to have no magical realism whatsoever. And they're structured as if they are interviews with the stars of these fairy tales. So perhaps the journalist interviewed one of the characters from Snow White who's telling you the story of what happened to those characters, but in a different setting. And in fact, Snow White is actually a queer retelling where the Snow White character is a boy instead of a girl. And there's also the 3 Little Pigs, there's Jack and the Beanstalk, there's Cinderella, and these stories are just magnificent. Cassandra Parkin does so much with so few words in such a short space of time, but each word is beautifully chosen and beautiful to read. I adored her prose in these fairy tale retellings, and I think along with Kissing the Witch by Emma Donoghue, this is my absolute favourite fairy tale retelling collection. And I think that's saying something, given that it does bring down the magic and make them less magical, makes them more real, but the magic is almost in the writing and they take you away with them, and they're so beautiful to read. and I just adore this collection and would highly recommend it to everyone. They're very unique retellings. It takes you a moment to actually figure out what fairy tale they're meant to be, and they're just so imaginative. Next up is a young adult science fiction novel that I was surprised to see had less than 500 ratings on Goodreads, and in fact appalled. So I would highly recommend you all go and read it. And this book is The Fallen Children by David Owen. This is actually a retelling or a book inspired by John Wyndham's The Midwich Cuckoos, which is a classic mid-20th century science fiction novel. You do not have to have read The Midwich Cuckoos, however, to read and enjoy The Fallen Children. So if that's what's stopping you from picking it up, then let it stop you no longer. This book almost improved on The Midwich Cuckoos in my opinion. I think it took it to a new level. It made it relevant to a new audience. It made it actually more relevant than perhaps the book ever was, and really drew on the original premise to comment on contemporary social issues. So we follow a group of 4 young women who live on a council estate in London, and something happens one night, a sort of force field surrounds their council estate, and when they wake up in the morning, they're all pregnant. They have been violated by some off-earth species that has impregnated them, and they don't know what to do about these pregnancies. They are people who have been left behind by the system. They are seeing it as difficult to get out of the situation that they're in. It's an exploration of poverty and how young people are affected by the current state of politics in the UK, at the same time as being just a intriguing, super well constructed science fiction story. And I love when science fiction gets a little bit political, because I think it can do that so well, and that has been done really well in this book. And one of the things I also appreciated about this book was they explored this scenario from the perspective of the women who had been impregnated, which is something that I feel is lacking from the Midwich Cuckoos. We're experiencing what's going on in their heads as these girls have woken up one morning to find themselves pregnant with children that are no normal children, and it's so fascinating. It's a wonderful book, and it's just really gritty, really powerful, and really fantastic characters. I would highly recommend it. Another book I'm shocked to see doesn't have more ratings on Goodreads is The Children of Jocasta by Natalie Haynes. This is a retelling of the Greek myth of Oedipus and Oedipus's family, but from the perspective of 2 women in Oedipus's family who are not usually seen as the central characters. So it's 2 perspectives. One perspective is that of Jocasta, who was the wife of Oedipus, and the mother of his children, and we get the perspective of their daughter Ismene, living in the kingdom that she was born into after both her parents having died in quite scandalous circumstances, and dealing with the aftermath of this. So we get the build-up of Jocasta's perspective of being married off, being betrothed, being given away by her family, of meeting Oedipus, of falling in love, of having her children, to everything that happens later. And then the aftermath with Ismene and her brothers and her sister Antigone, and everything that happens there in that myth. And it's so interesting. It actually takes away some of the more outlandish mythical aspects of the story and makes it about real people. It becomes historical fiction, and the incidents that involve gods and prophecies and monsters are sort of twisted to have realistic comparisons, and that's just really wonderfully done, because it's really trying to explore what it was like for these 2 female characters in these stories, or perhaps sometimes overlooked, and the realism that is added to it makes that all the more powerful and insightful. And if you enjoy Greek myth retellings, this is one you should definitely check out. I want to mention another collection of short stories, however, and that is The Doll's Alphabet by Kamila Grudova. This is published by Fitzcarraldo Editions, which do those lovely plain coloured simple typography editions of books, and I loved this short story collection. It was so otherworldly and ethereal and strange and wonderful and imaginative, and just all of the adjectives. It's an all of the adjectives book. It's for fans of short story authors such as Angela Carter or Jen Campbell. These are just gorgeous little moments that Kamila Gradova paints, and they're so imaginative and just stories I never could have come up with myself. I never knew where we were going with them. It was so intriguing. There is magical realism in these stories and constant reoccurring themes and images that pop up in each story, sort of linking them together and giving you like a sense of unity with the collection. The author does not shy away from exploring taboo topics, and I would certainly consider some of these short stories to be feminist short stories, and they make really interesting commentary, and they're just stunning to read. A little non-fiction book I want to recommend to you next is one of the Penguin modern minis, and that is Dark Days by James Baldwin. So this is a tiny little book collecting together a few essays by the author James Baldwin, who was a civil rights activist during the 20th century in America, and a black man growing up in America. And these essays are simultaneously autobiographical and also about the history of race and race relations in the US. They discuss segregation, they discuss the civil rights movement, they discuss James Baldwin's own life, his creative pursuits. He was also a journalist and a fiction author, and from the perspective of him growing up in America, you learn so much about race and racism in America, and it's such a powerful little collection, and it's tiny, so it's well worth picking and reading up. It's only about £1 as well. So you will get so much for your money with this little collection, and it's also still incredibly relevant today. This book might have been written decades ago, but it feels of now. It feels so relevant. The history is so relevant to today, and some of the contemporary stuff that James Baldwin was experiencing has not gone away. So it's such a great little book to pick up that you can read really fast and get a lot from. I then have Bodies of Water by V.H. Leslie that I want to mention next. This is a historical novel, although it is set between two time periods. It is set both in the contemporary world in London as well as in Victorian London, and our chapters flip between the two settings, and it follows two different women but living on the same property. So one woman is in a water treatment facility, which is essentially a facility where women were sent who were diagnosed with things like hysteria. They basically were women who weren't acting proper and demure and respecting what the men in their lives were telling them to do, so they were sent away to be cured. And that's what our Victorian woman is experiencing, whilst our women in contemporary London is living in a new build apartment block which is built on the same site as this water treatment facility, and she's recently experienced a breakup, and it's about both these women, and there's sort of this surreal almost bleeding of history into the contemporary period, where kind of the remnants of what happened to these women there decades ago seems to be seeping into the life of our modern women, and it's such a beautiful and intriguing novel. I really like novels that deal with hysteria and the treatment of women's health and mental health in the 18 and early 1900s. I think it's really fascinating, if harrowing, and I thought this book explored that in a really interesting way. There's lots of themes of water in this book, naturally, because of the water treatment facility. It's set on the edge of the Thames, and it just has a beautiful flow to it. It flows like water. You just read it very quickly and get consumed by it, and it's such a beautiful reading experience. But lastly, for this video, I can definitely do more Underhyped videos in the future if you're interested, and I have actually done some in the past, so I'll link those down below. I want to mention Fighters for Life by Michael Rosen. Now, I think I might have mentioned this in an Underhyped video before, but it's still not had enough ratings, so I'm mentioning it again. This is one of my favourite poetry collections. Michael Rosen is one of my favourite poets and writers and just people. He is one of the reasons I even got into poetry, because he wrote loads of children's poetry, and I read it when I was younger and adored it. I loved his poems when I was a child, and luckily for me I also enjoy his adult poetry, which is what Fighters for Life is. So Fighters for Life is a very political poetry collection, which is one of my favourite things. I love poetry that deals with politics. I love poetry that makes me angry but makes me feel empowered and makes me want to do something, that it comments on the world around me, that it makes me go, yes, I agree. That is what I want from poetry. I want somebody to pick out the perfect words to sum up the way I feel, and that is what Michael Rosen does. This is the kind of collection that I feel like makes you want to go out and do something. It turns you into an activist, and I love that. It's so upfront with its messages, it's so witty and observant. Michael Rosen, if you follow on Twitter, you will just know how well he can construct a sentence, and he's just very observant and can sum things up really well about contemporary society, and he does this through these poems, which are also just so nice to read. Michael Rosen is a fantastic writer. He writes wonderful things for adults and children, and I just want more people to read his adult work as well, because I think he's probably better known for his children's work. So I would highly recommend Fighters for Life. But those are all the books I'm going to mention in this video. There are many other underhyped books I could talk to you about, so like I said, if you'd like to see more of these videos in the future, let me know and I will make sure to do them. If you've not checked out my overhyped books video, I will link it down below. But other than that, I would love to know what your underhyped book recommendation is, and if you have any thoughts on the books I mentioned in this video. Until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!